They buried my wife on a Tuesday, and by Thursday my own stepson had thrown every piece of my clothing into black garbage bags and left them on the porch like I was a stranger who had overstayed a weekend visit. I want you to sit with that for a second because I need you to understand exactly what kind of man Daniel was before I tell you what kind of woman I became. 41 years old, my late wife's only son from her first marriage, a real estate lawyer who wore his ambition like cologne, and the moment his mother's casket touched the earth, he looked at me the way you look at a piece of furniture that no longer matches the room. "This house was never really yours," he said, standing in the doorway of the home I had lived in for 18 years, the home where I had painted the nursery that never got used because we married late, the home where I had nursed his mother through 3 rounds of chemotherapy while he flew in twice a year for the holidays. 18 years of my life, folded into contractor bags on a wet porch. If you're new here, stay until the end because what happens 6 months later is the part nobody saw coming, not even me. My name is Robert, and for most of my 61 years, I was exactly who everyone expected me to be. I drove a Ford, I coached Little League before my knees gave out, I wore the same 5 flannel shirts in rotation for a decade. My wife, Linda, used to tease me that I had the emotional range of a doormat, but she said it with love, the kind of love that lets you laugh at yourself without flinching. We met when I was 39 and she was 36, both of us already carrying scars from marriages that hadn't worked, and somehow we built something that did. She had Daniel from before, a boy of 11 when I met him, a boy who never quite let me all the way in but who I loved anyway because loving him was part of loving her. I told myself that was enough.
For 18 years, it was.
Linda got sick in the spring 2 years ago. Ovarian cancer, stage 3 by the time they caught it, and I watched the woman who ran marathons and laughed loud enough to fill a room shrink into someone who needed help lifting a spoon to her mouth. Daniel visited when he could, which is to say rarely, always with an excuse dressed up as a reason, always leaving before the hard parts, the vomiting, the delirium, the nights she screamed from pain that no medication could fully touch. I was the one who was there. I was the one who learned to change dressings and manage a feeding tube and hold her hand at 3 in the morning when the fear got too big for her to hold alone. 18 months of that. 18 months of watching someone disappear one piece at a time while her son called it hard for him too, and disappeared into his career instead. She died in January, on a morning so cold the windows had frost flowers on the inside of the glass. I held her hand until it went still, and something in me went still along with it. I want to be honest with you about what grief does, because nobody tells you the truth about it beforehand. Grief doesn't just take the person. It takes the version of you that existed around them. I had spent 18 years being Linda's husband, and now I didn't know what I was being anymore. I was a house with the load-bearing wall removed, still standing, technically, but wrong in a way you could feel even if you couldn't see it. Daniel arrived for the funeral in a black suit that probably cost more than my first car, delivered a eulogy that made strangers cry about a woman he barely visited, and by the time the last casserole dish left our kitchen counter, he had already decided I was an inconvenience to be managed. "The house is in Mom's trust," he told me, which was true, though he conveniently left out that Linda's will, drafted years before she got sick, explicitly gave me the right to remain in the home for as long as I wished. He was betting I didn't know that. He was betting that a grieving 61-year-old man wouldn't have the fight left in him to check.
He was almost right.
The garbage bags on the porch weren't really about the house. I understood that even then, through the fog of new grief. They were about something Daniel had sensed in me for years without ever having the words for it, something even I hadn't fully let myself see. He used to catch me looking a little too long at Linda's silk scarves when she draped them over the mirror to dry. He noticed once, when I was 53, that I trimmed my eyebrows with unusual care before a dinner party. Small things. Things a son notices about a stepfather he's already decided to be suspicious of. Somewhere in that boy's mind, he had built a story about me long before his mother died. A story where I was hiding something shameful, and her death gave him permission to act on a suspicion he'd been nursing for a decade. He didn't throw me out because the house belonged to him. He threw me out because he wanted an excuse to punish me for something he couldn't even name. If you've ever had someone try to erase you the moment you were at your most vulnerable, I need you to hear this next part, because it's the part that changed everything for me. I didn't fight him that night. I picked up the bags in the cold, loaded them into my truck, and drove to a motel off the interstate with fluorescent lights that buzzed like dying insects. I sat on the edge of a bed that smelled like bleach and cigarettes, and I did something I hadn't done since I was a teenager, hiding in my childhood bedroom. I cried until my whole body ached, and then, somewhere past midnight, I stopped crying and I started thinking. Really thinking, for the first time in years, about what I actually wanted, separate from what a wife needed or a stepson approved of or a small town expected. I had spent 61 years folding myself into a shape other people found comfortable. Linda's death and Daniel's cruelty had, in the ugliest way possible, handed me something I never asked for and never would have chosen. A blank page. I want to tell you about the scarf. Linda had a green silk scarf, emerald, with a pattern of small gold birds along the border, one of the only things of hers I'd kept in my truck rather than the house, because I'd been wearing her perfume on it just to feel close to her in those first raw days. Alone in that motel room, I took it out of the glove compartment and I held it, and then, almost without deciding to, I wrapped it around my neck and looked at myself in the water-spotted mirror above the dresser. 61 years old, unshaven, eyes swollen from crying, wearing my dead wife's scarf, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, the reflection looking back at me felt less like a stranger and more like someone I recognized. I didn't have a word for what I was feeling. I just knew it was the truest thing I'd felt in months. That night cracked something open that had been sealed shut since childhood. I remembered being 9 years old and trying on my mother's church dress in secret, the way the fabric moved differently than anything I owned, the way it made the air feel different against my skin. I remembered burying that feeling so deep and so fast, because my father was the kind of man who believed silence was a virtue and difference was a defect. I remembered spending the next 5 decades making sure that boy never surfaced again, not even in my own private thoughts, because I had learned, young, that some parts of yourself are safer left in the dark. Linda's death didn't create this part of me. It just removed the last reason I had to keep pretending it didn't exist. I stayed in that motel for 3 weeks while a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Patricia, who I found through a legal aid hotline, quietly built my case using the exact trust document Daniel had assumed I'd never read closely. During the day, I handled paperwork and eviction notices, and the cold machinery of grief turned bureaucratic. But in the evenings, alone in that room, I started buying things online with a card Daniel didn't know about. Small things at first, a tube of foundation 2 shades too light because I had no idea what I was doing, a pair of clip-on earrings from a discount store, a wig that looked more like a Halloween costume than anything real. I made a mess of it. I want you to know that because I think we sometimes only show the polished version of these stories, and the truth is I looked ridiculous the first dozen times. I cried with laughter at my own reflection more than once, mascara smeared halfway down my cheek, wig sitting crooked like a bird's nest. But underneath the mess was something that felt, for the first time, like relief. There's a particular kind of loneliness in becoming yourself in secret, in a motel room, at 61, with no one to ask for help and no map for what you're doing. I found forums late at night, communities of other men, mostly older, who had spent decades keeping this part of themselves folded away in bottom drawers and locked closets, and reading their words felt like finding a language I'd been speaking my whole life without knowing it had a name. A crossdressing, they called it, some plainly, some with more careful, personal words for their own experience of it, and none of the words mattered as much as the recognition. I wasn't broken. I wasn't the only one. I was, apparently, one of a great many quiet men who had learned to survive by disappearing, and who were now, in whatever form life allowed, trying to stop. The court battle with Daniel took 4 months. Patricia was relentless, and Linda, it turned out, had protected me more thoroughly than either her son or I had realized, right down to a handwritten letter attached to the trust, written 8 months before she died, that Daniel's lawyer had somehow overlooked providing to me. In it, Linda asked her son directly, in her own words, to take care of me, to let me stay in our home for as long as I needed it, to remember that I had been the one holding her hand when he couldn't bring himself to visit. Reading that letter in Patricia's office, I understood that Linda had seen more of what was coming than I had. She knew her son. She had tried, in the only way left to her, to protect me from him. I won the house. Legally, cleanly, undeniably. But by the time the judge ruled in my favor, I had already changed too much to simply move back in and resume my old life as if nothing had happened. Here's where the story turns, and I promise you, this is the part worth staying for. I moved back into the house in June, 5 months after the funeral, and I moved back in as someone Daniel had never met. I'd found a stylist 2 towns over, a woman named Carla who ran a small salon and asked no questions beyond what I wanted, who taught me things about color and shape and proportion that no forum could. I'd found clothes that fit not just my body but the person I actually was underneath 61 years of camouflage. I stopped wearing the flannel shirts. I let my hair grow out longer than a man should, and then, eventually, I stopped growing it at all and found a wig that actually suited me, soft brown waves that framed a face I was, for the first time, genuinely happy to see in the mirror. I practiced my voice in the empty house, softening it, finding a register that felt honest rather than performed. I bought a proper foundation shade this time, learned contouring from patient strangers on video tutorials, learned that eyeliner is a skill closer to calligraphy than cosmetics. Slowly, unevenly, the way any real transformation happens, I stopped playing dress-up and started simply existing as her. Her name, I decided, would be Renee. It felt like Linda's gift to me somehow, a name that had the shape of tenderness in it, something my wife might have chosen if she'd lived long enough to watch me become this. I don't believe in signs, not really, but I'll tell you that the first time I said the name out loud to my own reflection, fully dressed, hair done, standing in the same bedroom where Linda and I had slept for 18 years, I felt her presence so strongly I had to sit down on the edge of the bed. Not because it felt wrong, because it felt, for the first time in my grief, like she was proud of me instead of gone from me. Daniel came back to the house in September on a legal technicality about furniture he claimed belonged to his mother, and he did not call ahead. I remember exactly what I was wearing that day, a soft lavender blouse and dark jeans, minimal makeup because it was just an ordinary Tuesday and I hadn't been expecting anyone. I opened the door to find my stepson standing on the porch he'd once exiled me from, his mouth actually falling open, his eyes doing that rapid, cataloging thing people's eyes do when their brain is trying and failing to reconcile 2 versions of the same person. "Robert," he said, like a question, like he wasn't sure the words still applied. I could have shrunk in that moment. 18 years of training told me to shrink, to apologize, to soften the blow of my own existence for his comfort. Instead, I found myself standing a little taller in the doorway of a house he'd once told me was never mine. "You can call me Renee if you'd like," I said. "Or Robert." I answer to both these days. What I won't answer to is being thrown out of my own home again, so if you're here about the furniture, you can talk to Patricia. I wish I could tell you his face softened, that this became some tidy redemption story where the cruel stepson learns compassion and we hug it out over sweet tea. That's not what happened, and I won't lie to you and pretend it did. Daniel's face went through something complicated, disgust and confusion, and underneath it, something that looked almost like fear, the particular fear of a man realizing the world contains more than his framework accounted for. He said something cruel, something about his mother rolling in her grave, something about how he'd always known there was something wrong with me. I let him say it. I'd spent 18 years absorbing this family's discomfort as my personal burden, and I wasn't interested in doing it anymore. When he finished, I told him, calmly, that Linda's letter, the one his own lawyer tried to bury, said more about who truly loved her than anything he'd managed to say at her funeral, and then I closed the door. He hasn't come back since, not really, beyond a lawyer's letter or 2 about paperwork, and I won't pretend that doesn't sometimes ache in a quiet corner of my chest, because some part of me will always be the man who helped raise him, who sat through his Little League games even when Linda couldn't, who wanted, badly, for us to be something like family. But I've learned something in the years since Linda died that I wish I'd learned decades earlier. You cannot make yourself smaller forever just to be loved by people who are never going to see you clearly anyway. Some doors close because you finally stopped holding them open with your own body in the doorway. These days, Renee goes to the grocery store on Saturday mornings in a sundress if the weather allows it, chats with the woman at the flower stand who calls her Han, without a flicker of hesitation, has coffee twice a month with 3 other women from that late-night forum who turned out to live within an hour of me and who have become, unexpectedly, some of the truest friends of my life. I kept Linda's green silk scarf. I wear it sometimes, not because I need the reminder anymore, but because it feels like carrying a piece of the woman who, even from beyond the end of her own life, handed me the permission I'd spent 61 years too afraid to give myself. If there's one thing I'd want you to take from all of this, it's that reinvention doesn't usually arrive gently. It arrives, more often, through grief, through cruelty, through the garbage bags someone else packs for you in a moment meant to humiliate you. But what they intend as an ending can become, if you let it, the very first page of the truest chapter of your life. I lost my wife. I lost, in a real sense, my stepson. But somewhere in the wreckage of that terrible winter, I finally found the woman I'd been keeping locked in a 9-year-old's bedroom for over half a century, and I am not going to spend whatever years I have left keeping her hidden ever again. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it moved you even a little, tell me in the comments which part hit hardest, because I read every single one, and I promise you, there are more stories like this still to come.